Did you know that the United States has been in a war since the 1970s? What I'm referring to is the war on drugs, which first began in 1971 under President Richard Nixon. The war on drugs is a campaign that mainly aims to end drug use through incarceration. But what the war on drugs proves is that incarceration only begets drug use, which demonstrates the need for rehabilitation over incarceration. Now, I am going to be seeing into the future, and by seeing into the future, what I see is that within at least the next 5 minutes, I am going to be telling you about the problems that come with the way we incarcerate people and the high cost of the war on drugs. Following that, I'll be discussing the causes of this by examining the origins of the war on drugs and how and the faults with how prison treats the war on drugs and such people that are incarcerated for drug offenses. Lastly, I'll end by offering some solutions to remedy these problems, mainly by emphasizing the unrealized potential of rehabilitation. But before we tackle our first piece of evidence, I think some background information is needed, and that's mainly to discuss how people are sent to jail for drug use, which is that when one is caught violating the laws when it relates to drugs, they end up receiving a drug offense, which most of the time leads to incarceration, which is jail time, which is time spent in jail or prison. Now, with that information understood, we could discuss a newspaper titled The Scanner, which published a story on July 21st, 2021, to discuss how the war on drugs disproportionately incarcerates blacks and Latinos and often leaves them with a criminal record. Now, the issue in this, aside from the disproportionate rates of criminalization, incarceration for blacks and Latinos compared to whites, is that when one receives a criminal record, many avenues in life are cut off for you. For example, most employers for like high-paying jobs or successful jobs don't want to hire someone with a criminal record, leaving many people with a criminal record to only go to low-paying jobs or jobs that exploit their workers. What this means is that people that leave jail, that serve their time in jail for a drug offense, often have a hard time becoming readjusted into society due to this criminal record, which makes them more likely to go back to drugs. Now, following this comes an article published on July 2nd, 2023 by NBC News that discusses how the United States has spent over $1 trillion on the war on drugs, with spending on the war on drugs, convictions for drug offenses, and uses of drugs overall going up. Meaning that despite all the money that we keep pumping into the war on drugs, we haven't actually received a return on investment yet. Now, all this begs the question: why do we keep spending so much money on the war on drugs if it isn't very effective relative to the cost, and if it just makes drug use harder to actually escape due to the way we incarcerate people and leave them with a criminal record? So, why do we keep the war on drugs like this? Well, I don't know. But oh wait, actually, I have the cause right here. I do know why. In fact, I've got all I need. Published by the Business Insider on July 31st, 2019, comes a direct quote from one of President Richard Nixon's advisors during the time that he was developing the war on drugs, meaning this is the guy who very much knows what he's talking about. Here is a direct quote from him on the development of the war on drugs. That states that by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we can disrupt these communities. This basically hits the nail right on the head and explains why there's such a disparity between blacks and Latinos and how they get incarcerated more often compared to whites or other races. And it's very much intentional. The war on drugs was built on a foundation of racial prejudice. Now, on that same topic comes a source from Sunrise Recovery, published September 11th, 2024. Now, Sunrise Recovery is a facility that mainly operates a lot of substance abuse rehabilitation centers. And a direct quote from an article of theirs says that despite the high prevalence of substance abuse issues among prisoners, fewer than 20% receive treatment while incarcerated. What this means is that basically only 1 in 5 people who actually go to jail for a drug offense actually end up having the issue properly addressed, meaning that 80% of the people who actually end up arrested for drug uses don't even have the actual topic addressed, which makes it even more likely that they're going to go back to drugs after they get incarcerated. When you take both of these pieces of evidence in mind, both of these quotes in mind, it really makes sense why the war on drugs continues, despite the fact that it isn't very effective and that we're spending a lot of money on it, as it very much seems that it very much is like meant to target people of color and such. But if we go back to the source from Sunrise Recovery, there a solution becomes present by further analyzing that source. As in that same article, that, to reemphasize, published on September 11, 2024, discusses how dealing with drug abuse through treatment is not only cheaper than tackling the problem through incarceration, but it also has better results when it comes to reducing drug use. Meaning that really, to become successful in reducing drug use, the war on drugs shouldn't be focusing on a punishment. Rather, it should be focusing on rehabilitation, as it tends to have a much higher outcome in reducing drugs. But wait, there's more. As an article from NPR published on October 9, 2024, further exasperates the potential rehabilitation has when it comes to ending drug use, as they discuss how contingency management is one of the most effective ways of treating drug addiction. Essentially, what contingency management is it's a means of dealing with drug use through one of the popular concepts in psychology known as positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is something that sees a lot of use in our lives. For example, as children, many of our parents or teachers would reward us for good behavior, like with like a candy or like a treat or something, in order to encourage more of that said behavior. Or we think about it at work, how many bosses will reward their employees with a bonus or like a raise for continued good work, and they do this in order to they give people rewards for good behavior in order to promote that good behavior. And in the concept of drug use, the way contingency management works is that people who are found to be on drugs end up going weekly to receive a drug test, and if they're found to be clear of drugs, they receive a gift card, such as a gift card for $30 to like a grocery store or like just a general store. And the results of this, and for places that have been utilizing this contingency management tactic, they found that rates of drug use actually do go down, as many people actually do stop using drugs afterwards. What this basically highlights is the potential that rehabilitation has when it comes to curbing drug use. As, and not only that, but it's also cheaper. Such tactics for such as contingency management or just general drug addiction and rehabilitation centers are often much cheaper to the country than incarceration is. Now, with all this understood, I hope it becomes clear that going forward, the war on drugs should fight the disease and not the symptoms. As as America has clearly lost the war on drugs, but it's still clear. But as while America has lost the war on drugs, we can still win the war on addiction